During the first weeks of Treblinka's operation, knowledge about the camp's nature, or even existence, was largely speculative. Jews trapped in the Warsaw ghetto, although certainly apprehensive about the nature of their relocations east, had little to no notion of what Treblinka was, or even if it existed. However, as Treblinka entered its second month of operation, in the September of 1942, a Jewish underground newspaper in Warsaw called Auf die Wacht, meaning on guard, published an article that gave a chillingly accurate report on the nature of the camp. Within the article, Treblinka was described as a small village camp, surrounded by barbed wire. Supposedly, incoming Jews were unloaded onto a ramp before their admittance into the camp. Upon arrival, the article speaks of how an SS man would give a speech to the new arrivals at Treblinka, lying about the camp's function as a transit camp, in an attempt to trick them into going to the baths. Before their admittance to the baths, Auf die Wacht explained that Jews would be forced to undress, and it even mentions the infamous digger in the extermination area, transferred from Treblinka 1, which is truly remarkable. In fact, the only speculative part of the article was the exact means of killing in the baths, as all other comments on the camp were entirely accurate. According to their predictions, the baths either killed people by crushing, through the raising of the floorboards, gassing, which actually was the real explanation, or by an electrical current following a rise in water levels. Given that the gas chambers were a strictly cordoned off area of the upper camp, it makes sense that this part of the report was speculative, given that movement between the upper and lower camps was strictly prohibited. It is also interesting to note that Auf die Wacht did not claim that their report was objective, instead informing the reader that this was merely a speculation. Nevertheless, articles like that in Auf die Wacht and other reports published around the earlier periods of Operation Reinhardt are still used by the lazier Holocaust revisionists, who claim that the apparent contradictions with regard to the killing process in the extermination camps act as evidence for the notion that these were in fact not really extermination camps. Even if we ignore the fact that these reports are limited to a small number of documents, compared to the thousands upon thousands that assert that it was gas, the revisionist claim of contradiction still fails. You see, these reports were not asserting that X killing process was used at Treblinka, but rather that it could be X, Y, or Z. Speculation is not the same as a strong assertion. Other than the Jews of Warsaw, the Polish underground also possessed impressive intelligence on the Treblinka extermination camp. In fact, the Armia Krajowa, or Polish Home Army as they were called, arguably possessed even more impressive reports than the Jewish underground in Warsaw did on Treblinka, and they also seem to possess such information much earlier. Most impressive of all was their report on the Belzec extermination camp, which was sent to the Polish government in exile, who were operating out of London, in April 1942, a mere matter of weeks after Belzec had opened. However, that is a topic for the video on Belzec, as today we focus on Treblinka. The Armia Krajowa gained intelligence on Treblinka just weeks after the first transports left Warsaw, garnered largely from the local Polish railway workers. These workers, lots of whom were involved in, or members of, the Armia Krajowa, reported that all transports leaving Treblinka would be empty, and that every single transport returned from whence it came. Given that Treblinka was a small village camp, it would seem illogical to infer that these people, of which there were tens and tens of thousands, would be enslaved on such small premises. Hence, the Armia Krajowa concluded that the Germans were killing the people who disembarked into Treblinka, and hence dubbed it as an annihilation camp. Franciszek Rzepecki, a Polish railway worker who operated near Treblinka, helped the Armia Krajowa to infer such a conclusion, and he noted upon the following. I rode my bicycle in order to find out what was going on over there. The concrete road on which I rode was a straight distance of about 200 meters from the camp. I got off my bicycle as if I were fixing it. I fixed it for more than 10 minutes. From the camp, I heard screams of desperation and crying. They pierced the air. Songs and psalms in Yiddish and Polish reached my ears. Above all was the rat-a-tat-tat of machine guns. Zabecki's allusion to machine guns is especially striking, as we know from countless testimonies that during Abel's reign as commandant, his men would often open fire on the Jews as they disembarked from their cattle carts. Hence, we can link his testimony to well before September 1942. In another testimony, we have General Bor Komorowski, second in command of the Armia Krajowa, who wrote the following in his diary. No later than July the 29th, 1942, we learned from the reports of railway workers that transports were being taken to the concentration camp of Treblinka, and that Jews were disappearing without trace. There can no longer be any doubt that the deportations are the beginning of an extermination. Remarkably, just 7 days after the Treblinka extermination camp became operational, the Polish underground was already aware of it and its purpose. The Armia Krajowa possessed knowledge of what was happening in Belzec, Treblinka, and to a more speculative extent, Sobibór, for the first few weeks in which the camps were operational. The Polish underground published reports on the camp regularly throughout Treblinka's lifespan, including a detailed report on the Białystok deportations in January 1943, as well as a brief report on the uprising itself. However, perhaps most intriguing of all was that initially, the British government did not believe the Polish intelligence on the Aktion Reinhardt death camps, or at the very least, thought that it was greatly exaggerated. Stefan Kobonski claimed that the Polish government in exile did not respond to such reports initially, and he had to contact them repeatedly in hope of a response. He noted the following. I sent a special radiogram in which I requested clarification for the reasoning behind their silence. I did not receive answers, even to this radiogram. This game went on for a few days, until as a result of the daily alarms of the station in London, the government finally responded. Its exact wording was, "Not all of your radiograms are appropriate for publication." Many months later, the entire matter was explained to me by an envoy of the government who had recently been parachuted into the homelands. He told me that the radiograms were not believed. The government did not believe them, nor did the British believe them. It was said that I exaggerated anti-Nazi propaganda. Only when the British received confirmation of these facts from their own sources did the BBC finally transmit my report. So the notion of Treblinka was so extreme, so unbelievable, that even the British government, who were fighting a war against Nazi Germany, feared disseminating such information in the fear that it would sound too extreme. Nothing more than a lazy piece of propaganda devised to smear the Germans and Hitler. While the BBC did remark upon the extermination camps, they were given little representation within the war reporting as a whole, and the British government made no effort whatsoever to try and sabotage future deportations. This ethical dilemma, which is more commonly examined through the classic question of should Britain have bombed the railway lines to Auschwitz, can be backdated to the Reinhardt facilities. Obviously, bombing campaigns over Poland in 1942 and 43 would have been far more dangerous than in 44-45, but, theoretically, the British could have at least tried to sabotage the railway lines to Treblinka by funding the Armia Krajowa. However, to claim that the latter organisation would have prioritised such actions is highly debatable anyway, as the Polish-Jewish relationship was complicated to say the least. Either way, the notion that Treblinka and the other Reinhardt facilities were brilliantly encrypted and that no one knew of them is rather laughable in light of these Polish and Jewish reports.